You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
And welcome back to WCDB Albany. This is the Social Workers Live Radio Talk Show. My name is Eric Hardiman, and I am here with my regular co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hi, Eric.
And if you're just tuning in for the first time, The Social Workers is a live radio talk show that Alyssa and I have been hosting for over 5 years now, co-hosting. And we cover subjects related to social welfare in the community, related to public policy, related to community engagement and community issues, a range of issues that are all loosely connected with social work. And so if those are topics that at all interest you, we hope you'll stick around and listen to the interviews today. So I'd like to welcome you again to the Social Workers Live Radio Talk Show. Today we have with us here in the studio Teresa Gil. Teresa is a master's degree. She has a master's degree in professional studies in humanistic education, and also a second master's degree in clinical social work, and a Ph.D. in social work from right here at the University at Albany, State University of New York. Teresa has over 25 years. She has been a psychotherapist, professor, and trainer. She has a private practice working with women, children, and families dealing with addictions and recovery from child abuse and trauma. She is full professor at Hudson Valley Community College in Troy, New York, where she teaches general psychology, abnormal psychology, child psychology, and psychology of women. Her courses emphasize biological, psychological, and sociological factors that shape human growth and development. She is also taught at the graduate level. Teresa is a trainer and consultant in human service settings and has developed and facilitated more than 24 workshops and clinical trainings on pertinent clinical and therapeutic issues. Her child welfare workshops are designed to provide child welfare staff with the knowledge and skills necessary to help assess and respond to families in crisis, including techniques for engaging families in a working relationship and the skills for interviewing effectively with clients. She has facilitated large group workshops on communication, parenting skills, and family relations. Quite a bio there. You've done quite a bit. Most importantly, though, we want to welcome you to the show, Teresa. We also know that you've written a book, and the book's title is Women with Histories of Childhood Sexual Abuse, Mothering, Resilience, and Protecting the Next Generation, which is published by Rowman and Littlefield Publishers. Welcome to the show, Teresa Gil.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you so much again, Teresa, for coming on, and we were really excited to talk about your new book and also the other things that you've mentioned in your bio, which is quite a lot of accomplishments you've had. So let's just start off about this new book, which again is Women with Histories of Childhood Sexual Abuse. Why did you write this book?
The topic came to me in my private practice when women would come to me. I would ask them the big question, what brings you to therapy? What are your goals? And all the mothers said to me that they are in therapy because they want to be better mothers. And one mother said, I went through the child abuse as a child, but I'm willing to come back and revisit it one more time because I see that my history is interfering with the mother that I want to be. And I thought that was a pretty powerful statement. And even though when we read the literature, we see that women who have histories of child sexual abuse as adults will experience PTSD and depression, anxiety, addictions. But at the same time, these women were willing to put their own needs to the side so that they could do something different for their own children. And I wanted to find out what made these women resilient, because rather than just as therapists or social workers or counselors, rather than just see if these factors are in their life or not, we can actually implement these factors in their lives to help them be more resilient, particularly the mothers who are struggling.
So tell us a little bit. It's a fascinating topic, and it's a topic that is extremely important. Also, a sensitive topic, and a topic that's not always easy for folks to talk about. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book and sort of how you from soup to nuts went through the process of writing it?
Well, the book is a combination of two things. So it's part of the dissertation that I did.
Okay.
So I had done a number of interviews with women with histories of child sexual abuse. I'd went through the IRB and, worked out a qualitative study design. So half of it is the interviews that I did when I was doing the qualitative research. The other part of it is related to the research that already exists out there on mothering among survivors. Although, to be honest with you, over the last 30 years, there may be 18 to 20 research articles on this particular population, which is really not enough, particularly when you think that there are potentially 21 million mothers in the United States who are mothering with histories of child sexual abuse, and they're struggling. And many times, researchers are the ones that read the research articles, not the mothers and not the online workers with these mothers. So I thought it was important to write a book about them. And the other thing that I did, because once you put something into your dissertation, it becomes a little sterile. So I felt like I had to breathe life back into it. So when I was writing the book, I combined my own experiences of 25 years of working with women. So not only is it a combination of the research that exists, the research that I did, but also my practice experiences. That way it's much more readable, has a lot of case studies and stories, so that it will resonate with mothers, people who want to support mothers, whether it's family members, significant others, children, or counselors.
Okay.
So that's a good range, because I wasn't sure when I was first reading this if it was more for a clinician who is going to be working with mothers, or if the mothers themselves could read this and sort of have some guidance as to some of the factors you're going to speak about, and that's going to be my next question, about the factors that impede and support resiliency. But is this something that's beneficial for the mothers to sort of process as they're reading this, or is it more for them to process with a clinician in that kind of sense?
I've gotten good feedback on the book from survivor moms, and they've said, thank you so much. You're able to put my experience into words. I didn't have words before of what was happening to me and what was interfering with my mothering. And when I heard it, one woman said she actually cried because she felt somebody was able to speak for her and resonated with her experiences. Mothers have given me good feedback. There have been some women who are older, and they came to me and said, I wish I had this book 30, 40 years ago when I was raising my children. So it is for mothers as well as it is for counselors. Although one of the protective factors that I found when I was interviewing women was that their therapist was a large protective factor in their lives. Their therapist was the mother they didn't have, was a role model for good mothering, had to have a good relationship with somebody that they could count on, because many of them could not count on anybody as children. And so they were a secure base to talk about their experiences. So I think that if you're a mother with a history of trauma and you're struggling, the book will be good for you, but it will give you information about how to proceed in your life so you can be a better mother. But I think it's really important to have the support of an outside person as you begin to do that process of healing.
I know that a lot of times childhood sexual abuse is something that is kept hidden, and particularly in previous years, that type of trauma is something that is not always apparent and not always readily disclosed. And so I wonder if you have some thoughts on how, sort of a couple questions. How has it changed over time since you've been working in this area? Do you see more recognition both in society at large about the impact of these types of trauma, but then also are there newer ways for women that are experiencing or have experienced this trauma, this type of trauma, to be identified and to get the support that they need rather than to suffer in silence?
I think we've come a long way, and at the same time, I hear stories where I feel the sexual abuse in particular is silenced. I think people feel really uncomfortable talking about the issue. I know that when I do like my book fairs, that I'll have my book up there and people just kind of like step back about 5 feet, walk around the table and go to the next person. So although there are some people who will come up to me and say, thank you for writing this. But so I think it's still a difficult issue for people to talk about. I'm the only book that's been written on this subject. And that's a lot to say for 30 years of research. And that there's only maybe 20 articles on the subject is, not very promising. And yet again, as I said before, probably 21 million moms, and they still do suffer in silence. Like one mother told me when she came into therapy, she said that when she was the age that her child was when she was sexually abused, and this is pretty common, that's when she started to have flashbacks. So she was bathing her daughter and she started to have flashbacks of her own abuse with her uncle, and she felt that she was going crazy. She felt, oh my God, what's happening to me? She actually felt that it might have meant that she was going to sexually abuse her own daughter, and she was like horrified and couldn't make sense of what was going on. She didn't want to go to her husband because she never told her husband that she was sexually abused as a child, and she certainly didn't want to go to her doctor because she felt that if she shared this with her doctor, he might hotline her in and the child would be taken away. So what she did is she relinquished her intimate caregiving responsibilities to her husband. She cooked. She kept the house really clean. She did the laundry. She was on top of all the structural things to keep the house going. But it was her husband who read to her child at night during bedtime. It was her husband who dressed the children, who bathed them. He did all of that intimate caretaking. And that was the way she balanced it until she came into therapy. And she was able to make, boundaries around what her experiences was as a child and as a mom.
Yeah. So I would imagine, thinking into the future, looking forward, if we were to imagine a society where these types of experiences were talked about more and were more openly disclosed and women could get support, what would that look like? I mean, would it be that general practitioners and doctors and other people working with new moms might ask different questions or provide a different environment? Or, I wonder if you have some thoughts about that.
Well, it's interesting because I know that a lot of doctors are now asking questions around, is there domestic violence in the home? Are you struggling with depression or anxiety? And so that's becoming routine. How are you doing in life in general? But because I was in the doctor, like, getting my annual checkup, and they were asking me all these questions. But as they were asking me these questions, they were facing the computer, their back was to me, and they were typing it in. Yeah. And I thought, there is no way that somebody's going to answer these questions, pour out their hearts to you, talk about their vulnerability with your back turned to them, without the relationship. So I think it's good that doctors are becoming aware of adverse childhood experiences and the impact on health and mental health, but there needs to be a relationship and there needs to be an understanding between the patient or client and the health provider that relationship is critical, because nobody's going to discuss vulnerable things. Nobody's going to give you their heart if it's not if they don't think it's going to be received well.
I often wonder what happens too when general practitioners or other medical providers do get positive responses to questions like that. Does that just trigger a referral, or is there a supportive conversation that happens? Are the medical professionals trained to go the next step, or do they panic a little bit when someone discloses something and they just push it off to a different provider?
If somebody is disclosing under those circumstances, it probably means that they really want help. And it's up to who that provider wants to be in relationship to their clients. Do they want to be just the head and writing a prescription, or do they want to have heart and connection to the person? If you want to have heart and a connection to the person, then you'll learn about relationship skills. Then you'll learn about creating safe environments where your patients can confide in you personal issues so that you can actually do something with it. And now that we know about epigenetics and we know about ACEs and its impact on health outcomes, that's really critical that they have that as part of their practice.
It's such an important part because when you were sending people to doctors, and like I said, it is added to the screening tools that they're doing to have someone to be able to address it if there is a response that is saying, yes, I do need help. I'd like to back up a little bit about resiliency, and that's, in the title of your book, and you mentioned it a lot. Can you explain a little bit, and you've touched on it, but can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by resiliency, and then some of the factors that impede and support it as you're working with moms?
Well, the book discusses resiliency in childhood. So what, as a child, what are the risk factors in your life that create long-term consequences? Because not everybody that experiences child sexual abuse will have long-term consequences. So what were the risk factors in their life, and what were the protective factors in their lives that allowed them to move forward and to move through the abuse experience and to function fairly well as an adult? And then I also look at what are the risk factors and the lack of protective factors in a child's life that you would see more of the long-term psychopathology. And then another chapter looks at what are the risk factors as a mom, as an adult, and what are the protective factors as a mom and as an adult. So do you want me to address protective factors as a child or as a mom?
Well, I'm curious about the because the book is predominantly, I think, about mothering.
Yes.
Maybe let's talk about that. And when you say, just for our listeners, when you say protective and risk factors, can you explain and define that concept a bit?
So resiliency is the ability to be able to bounce back from difficult experiences.
Okay.
So you can have two people with the same histories, let's say two women with histories of child sexual abuse. One of them is functioning. They're able to be the mothers they want to be. They're able to provide for their children and meet their children's needs. They're able to sustain relationships that are reciprocal and nurturing. And then another mother with the same history is having difficulty with sustaining relationships, maybe volatile relationships, maybe relationships that include drugs or alcohol or abuse, or not able to meet the needs of their child, unable to, respond to their child's cries. So you have two of the same people. Why would somebody do better? And why wouldn't somebody do as well? So that's when we look at risks and protective factors. So risks are things like having history of child sexual abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent with an unmedicated mental illness, or a parent that's actively addicted to drugs and substances. And a protective factor, one of the major protective factors that all the women in my research talked about was having somebody that loved them. Okay. That is key and critical. So the survivors that I worked with that knew that there was somebody out there that loved them, they were able to fare better. They were able to sustain long-term reciprocal relationships that were kind and loving and nurturing. They were able to pick partners who were good, and in terms of being able to live a life that was comfortable and being able to be really freed from their histories. So having a loving, kind person in childhood is a huge protective factor. So protective factors help us to overcome risks.
I see.
So one way to think about it is how many risk factors you have. How many protective factors do you have? If you have more protective factors than risk factors, your chances of being resilient, of being able to bounce back, is increased. So what I would like to do as somebody in the helping professions is we see that our clients are struggling. How can we then help them build
Sure.
protective factors so that we can simultaneously increase their ability to be resilient.
So if you've just tuned in, you're listening to the Social Workers live radio talk show, and we have with us here in the studio Teresa Gil, who is author of a new book entitled Women with Histories of Childhood Sexual Abuse, Mothering, Resilience, and Protecting the Next Generation. So I'm curious, and this is maybe a slightly different question, but relates to my own research, which is in the area of peer support. Are there models, and I'm not familiar, but are there models in this area of women who have the lived experience of childhood sexual trauma and childhood sexual abuse, who then provide a peer lived experience voice to other mothers, new mothers who may be going through it? Are there models of that peer support happening?
Well, it's really interesting. So for women who are surviving trauma, so women are very relational, and women feel that they can thrive better when not only they can receive, but they can also give back. So reciprocity is a really key component in the ability to be able to be resilient. And that's why groups are so important. So many times what happens in groups, you'll have some people who are functioning higher in certain areas and some people who are functioning lower in certain areas, and they can support one another. The other thing that groups do is help validate your experiences. Many times for women, it's the group experience is the first time that they were able to share their secret and to discuss it and feel safe in doing so. And many times, I mean, if you think about a little child that was sexually abused, part of the huge piece of the hurt is that they had nobody to go to help them regulate the physiological and emotional experience of the trauma. So they get stuck there. And because they're young, they don't have the words or the mental capacity to be able to put the words to their experience. So again, furthering getting them stuck in that particular time and not being able to move past it. Groups allow words for that internal experience, and sometimes for the first time. That's very freeing to women. And that is a really good peer support system and an important support system, particularly if we think about women who thrive in reciprocal relationships.
Right.
No, you mentioned in your book about the therapeutic relationships and resiliency and recovery. What is the link that you saw for that?
That was actually nice to hear because it kind of validated, oh yeah, therapists are important. It's not all about me. I actually do some good. We'll leave that there. But anyway, so all the women that I interviewed, every single one of them said that their therapist was critical to their recovery, that their therapist offered many of the things that they did not get in childhood and contradicted a childhood of hurts. Just having one person that you know will be there once a week for an hour and a half, however you set it up, is a protective factor. They just know that somebody is out there. Many of my clients told me, and the women that I interviewed, that they would actually have discussions with me during the week in their head. And they would have me there to help them figure out and resolve problems. So in many ways, they kind of integrated my voice and the lessons and the relationship to their other relationships. That's extremely important. They felt that they could be heard. They felt that they had a friend. They felt that they had a place that they could go to where they wouldn't be judged. They felt that they had a trusting place to talk about the most vulnerable parts of their experiences, and past and current. They felt safe. And, you know, what you can offer as a therapist is safety. Now, on the other side of that, there's some literature that says if a client has never had the experience of safety, that no matter how much you try to create a therapeutic relationship, it's not going to work because they have no memory of a safe relationship.
Right.
So us trying to create a safe relationship and get close is going to be a major trigger. So many times what will happen in those situations is the client will resort to the old defense mechanisms of the past. You're trying to get close, they may go into fight-flight, lack of trust, or they may go into collapse. So fight-flight is they don't show up.
Right.
Fight-flight is they get defensive and they fight what you're saying to them, or they're resistant. And collapse is, they look like they're taking it all in, but they're not making eye contact. Their body posture is collapsed. Their skin tone will change color. So they look like that they're there, but they're not really there. So we need to help clients figure out what in their life help them to feel safe, so we can begin to recreate those experiences for them, help them to grow so that therapeutic relationship can happen. Many times clients said the therapist was the mother they never had. Mm-hmm. The therapist was the model of how to be a good mother, how to listen well, how to not have judgment, how to be kind and understanding. They used that experience between therapists and themselves to be with their children, friends, and loved ones.
Yeah. We know from this type of work, and certainly from the literature and from being in the social work arena, that this working with mothers who have experienced childhood sexual abuse, is really difficult work. And I think it's worth acknowledging that that there are some challenges in doing the work for the therapist or for the social worker or for the supporting professional. Whether that be secondary traumatization, whether that be just the emotional burden of trying to help someone who's going through something so difficult and challenging. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and sort of how the professional, how the helper deals with some of those challenges with such a difficult issue.
A lot of people say that to me. How can you deal with such a difficult issue and difficult stories? I think one of the reasons is because I find these women really powerful. I find them to be strong and courageous and resilient, and I'm impressed by them. And so that's really helpful. The other thing that's really helpful is to know that your role and the bridge of caring that you have, so you don't take on the client's issues, but you offer as a witness to be present for them, knowing that presence and non-judgment and that acceptance is part of the healing process, and that if you do that, you're giving a lot. It's also good to have skills in terms of the theory that I work from is that if somebody has experienced a lot of emotional distress in present time, that they need to go backwards and they need to go reclaim the period of time where that distress started and didn't get managed or handled well, because it's growing and festering and it's leaking into present day situations. So it's good to have skills for the client and for yourself, that when things feel loaded and overwhelming and that words are not cutting through or making it better, that it's time to go backwards in order to move forward. And so having that theory in place is really helpful too. And also knowing you don't have to fix it. You have to be present. And you have to help people get through the worst of their experiences in their lives and the most traumatic of their experiences in their lives. Gabor Mate said, it's not so much the sexual abuse experience that was hurtful, but that you were alone and you weren't allowed to have a place to discuss it. And that awareness of aloneness and no place to go is really what the hurt is, because it cuts you off from your true self. It cuts you off from your authenticity, and that's where the trauma is.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up, because there's so much content we could go on for so many more questions that as you answer each one of these, I have so many more questions, but we are running out of time. So I'd like to know what supports we can offer survivor moms so they can be more effective in their mothering. What are some things that would help with increase those protective factors and decrease the risk factors that you were talking about?
Well, that's actually one of the last questions I asked the women that I was interviewing. So this is what they said. They said that their therapist was really important, and looking at their childhood issues was really important, but they also wanted skills. They wanted, like, real concrete skills to deal with present-day situations. Kids grow up fast. You don't really have the time to work the 5-8 years to work on your issues. So therapy needs to be a balance between the past and the present, helping them with skills, knowing what they're struggling with, and giving them concrete practices to intervene with their children. So that's one important area. The other important area is that one of the protective factors is having a close relationship, someone who's helping them co-parent, whether it's a husband or a significant other. So many times, survivors don't have models for good, healthy relationships and communication skills and conflict-solving skills. It's really important to give them information and skills of how to sustain resilient relationships, how to have ways to interrupt negative patterns in their life, and how to fix problems so that they don't become insurmountable. Because having that co-partner was really important. Helping relationships in families, having a grandparent is really important. Many times mothers said, I love that I'm able to leave my children with my mother or my father or both, and I'm able to get a break, and I'm able to get some time away. People who have dysfunctional families that are still acting out in terms of violence or addictions or mental illness that is unmedicated, those women could not leave their children with family members, and that left them more isolated in their parenting, and that's a risk factor. That's besides poverty, the second risk factor is isolation in parenting. So we want to be able to break that isolation and help them to make connections, but gives them the skills to make those connections so that they can be sustaining.
I really like that your overall message, despite the intensity of this subject and the seriousness and the trauma and the the really the weight of the subject, is that there's a message of recovery and a message of hope and a message of strength and empowerment that seems to run through all of your ideas. And I think that's a really important piece to sort of leave the conversation with, that there is hope. And that for mothers that have experienced, that have this history, whether they've started to address it or not, or get the supports that they need or not, that there is hope on the other side of this, and that it's not a bleak future necessarily.
These are strong women. They survived trauma as children, and they're ready to face it again in order to do something different for their own children. That's hope. That's resilience, and that's courage.
So where can you are listening to the Social Workers Live Radio Talk Show, and we've been interviewing Teresa Gil here in the studio. Teresa is author of a book entitled Women with Histories of Childhood Sexual Abuse, Mothering Resilience, and Protecting the Next Generation. How can listeners find out about your book, and how can they find out about the work that you're doing if they want to learn more?
Amazon has my book. So you can order it on Amazon. You can also order it through Roman and Littlefield.
Great.
I have a blog on Psychology Today on mothering and survivors. And I also have a website, Teresa Gil, Ph.D., so that they can go to the website too.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being our guest today. We've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, and we love having alums on, so it's an even extra bonus for this.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Social Workers here on WCDB Albany.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.